All right, Ranch Boss here. What I'm going to talk about today is a pioneer graveyard that we have on the ranch. And about a decade ago, when I came out here, I discovered what appeared to be the beginnings of a graveyard, and I called the county and told them that I think I had an old pioneer graveyard. So they sent a volunteer out here, and they sent out Marjorie was her name, and she showed up, and she was about an 80-year-old woman, weighed 90 pounds, not what I expected, and she had a unique talent to help find graves. And let me show you what she showed me. Okay, well, Marjorie pulled up right over here in her truck. She got out. She had a pair of these with her. I don't know what she's doing. I didn't know the dynamics of what she was about to do, what she was going to show me. And she gets out, and I'm just standing out of her way, and she gets these out, and she's looking around at the trees and looking at the east from the west, and she starts doing this. They would swing open. She had some stakes in her back pocket. She pulled them out. She'd hammer them down, and then she would look around a little bit more, and she would hold these like this, and she would be walking around. These things would swing open. She would nail down a little stake. She did this 3 or 4 times, and I finally had to stop, and I asked her, "Marjorie, what are you doing?" And she says, "Well, I'm finding the people that are buried here." And I says, "Really? What are those? What are you doing?" And she said, I said, "Where? I've never seen this. I've never heard of this. Where did you learn this? Is this for real?" And she said that when she was a young woman, she's lived in the country all her life, and they do things differently. She said that an old man showed her how to do this, and she says it's a gift. I don't know. That's what she told me. And after she proceeded to mark them, she came back. She'd put one in her hand like this, and it would go a certain way. She had a big black magic marker in her pocket, and she'd put a M, and then she'd go and do another one. And it would swing another way, and she'd put an F on it. And I stopped her again. I said, "Okay, Marjorie, what are you doing now?" She says, "Well, I'm determining if it's a male or a female." And I'm thinking, okay, the county out here in this little country town, they got a bunch of kooks on the payroll. I don't know. I said, "Would you please explain that one to me?" And she said that an old man back in the 40s who owned a funeral home actually showed her this. And she said some people have the gift and some people do not have the gift. And I said, "Well, what are these rods?" And she says they're nothing special. I think she had something she called some kind of welding rod. And she said you can buy these things at any hardware store. And so when I went back to my home about 150 miles away, I went into Home Depot and I looked around. Sure enough, I found these that are 4-foot long straight rods, and it was a little too long, so I cut a foot off, bent this angle off the bumper of my truck. I just put it on there, bent a good angle on it, and I told my wife, "We're going to the local graveyard here, and you keep an eye out for me because I don't want anybody seeing me do this because it's kind of weird. They're going to think I'm kooky, and I don't want that. So watch out, honk the horn if anybody is coming by." So I looked around, nobody's around. I got out my whatever these things are called, and I started walking around, and I did not look at the tombstones. I didn't want to prejudice the results. And I started walking around, and sure enough, they opened up. So I backed up. Wonder if it's a male or a female. It went a certain way. I did it 3 or 4 times, and it was consistent. So, according to Marjorie, apparently I had the gift, whatever that means. And in the last 10 years, I've had many, many customers come out to the ranch, and I've shown this to many people, and 75% of the people can have these rods respond, and about 25% have no luck. And that's kind of the story of the graveyard here. But another quick side note, Oh, about 5 years ago, I had some guys come to the ranch, like all my customers. I don't know who they are, what they do for a living. And I asked these guys, what do you guys do for a living? And they told me, we're prophets. I'm like, cool. I don't think I've ever had a busload of prophets show up at the ranch. So what do prophets do? We hear from God, and we give the people a word from God. And I'm like, that's fantastic. I'm a Christian. Whatever you say, that's fantastic. God bless you. So, thinking about this, I decided to invite one of them down here to the graveyard without the others knowing it. So we drive out here, we pull up, we stop right over here, and I asked, I don't remember what his name was, it was about 5 years ago, and I asked him, I said, or I told him, I said, now this is an old graveyard, I just want you to give me your impression of this. And he kind of closed his eyes, and I don't know if he was going into some kind of spiritual trance. And then he opened his eyes, and he looked up at that oak tree over there, and he said, in my spiritual eye, I see that somebody was hung from the neck until they were dead, and that this is an evil place, and that there's been seances done on this graveyard. It's an evil place. And I'm like, okay, what should I do? He says, you shouldn't come here. There's evilness here. There's demons here. I'm like, okay. So I took him. I dropped him off at the other end of the ranch. I went back and I found one of the other prophets. I picked him up and I brought him over here. Same thing. And I asked him, this is a graveyard here on the ranch. Give me your impression about this place. And again, he did the same thing. He kind of went into this spiritual meditation, this trance. He opens up his eyes and he's looking at my trees. And he looks at this old cedar tree right here, and he said, there's a demon living in that tree. And I says, really? So he walked over here with me to about this spot, and he said, you see that knothole in that tree right there? I says, yeah, I see it. He said, there's a demon in that knothole, and it's looking at us right now. And I says, you're kidding. What should I do? He said, you should get a tool and you should cut that tree down and you should burn the tree and then you should destroy the tool that you cut that tree down with. So I'm thinking through my head a couple of things really fast. I'm like, okay, I just bought about a $600 brand new chainsaw, and you're not going to cut that down with an axe. That's a job for a chainsaw. So I'm thinking right off the bat, I don't want to destroy my $600 chainsaw. And then I'm thinking, number two, what if he's right? What if there is a demon living in that tree? And I thought to myself, you know, if that demon is happy in that tree and he's leaving me alone back at camp, I probably don't want to cut his house down and burn it, because now he's floating around and he's mad at me and he's going to be down there giving me grief. So I decided, no, we're not going to cut that tree down. I'm sure not going to tear up my chainsaw. So that night, I go back to camp. I'm telling my staff about this crazy story that these prophets told me, and they wanted to come to the graveyard at night. So let's walk over here and I'll show you what we did. All right, so we pull up in the Jeep right here, and I've got one of my guides with me, and I'm telling him the story again, and I said, David, that prophet told me that there's a demon in that tree over there. We're 10 o'clock at night, and I said, I want you to get out of this Jeep, and I want you to go look in that knothole, and I want you to tell me what you see. So David, he gets out of the truck, he turns on his flashlight. It was summertime, so the weeds were about this tall, and he's just kind of tiptoeing through the weeds real tall, shining it at the tree, seeing if anything's moving, looking through the weeds, more afraid that something's going to jump out of the 3 or 4 foot tall weeds. He gets about right here, and this is summertime. It's probably 10 o'clock at night. It's still 95 degrees. He got to right here, and he turns around, and he runs back to the Jeep. And I says, what are you doing? He says, you're not going to believe it. I got to that marker, and it was like it was 50 degrees over there, and I just got chills all over me. And let's go back to camp. I don't want to do this. And we're all laughing at him. I think he might have had a beer or two that night, so he was already a little crazy. So I had another guide in the back seat. I said, Johnny, get out and go look at that knothole in that tree and tell me what you see. So Johnny's laughing at David, and he grabs a flashlight, and he's tiptoeing through the weeds that are this tall, be sure that there's not a hog or a snake or something going to jump out at him. Same thing. He gets about right here, and he runs back and jumps in back of the Jeep, and I says, what are you doing? He says, man, I got to that place, and look at the hair on my arm. It's standing straight up. Let's go. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, if you want something right, you're just going to have to do it yourself. So I grabbed a flashlight from him. I got out of the Jeep. I came around. And, of course, I think they had me a little psyched out, but I'm just more disgusted with them than anything. So I'm walking through the tall weeds with the flashlight. I'm shining it up in the tree, be sure that nothing's going to jump down out of the tree at me. And I get to the same spot, and I experienced it myself. It had to 50 degrees or less, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The hair on my arm stood up. My whole body had this crazy rush about it. So I ran back to the Jeep. I jumped in the Jeep and I said, that's enough for one night, guys. Let's go. And off we went back to camp. So the next week, one of my guides is driving through the area on a night hunt with some customers in his personal vehicle. And he gets into the area of the graveyard, and he was about 100 yards away. And the lights on his Jeep, they just started intermittently blinking, on and off, on and off, on and off. And he didn't think anything about it. He thought he might have had a short in his Jeep. So he drives through the area, and as soon as he got outside the area, the lights straightened up. Again, he didn't think anything about it. I've got a short in my lights. A few days later, and in the meantime, he'd been to town a couple times in his Jeep. He'd been all over the ranch at night in his Jeep. His lights were on. Never happened again. A few days later, it happened again to the same vehicle. So now he's wondering, I'm in the same area. It happened again. My lights are intermittently blinking on and off. Wonder what's going on. And at that time, we had just broken ground not too far from here on our butcher shop. Breaking the ground, changing things. And again, I'm not saying what did or didn't happen, if that had any cause. I'm just telling you what happened. So the next weekend, one of my other guides had some guests come on to the ranch. There were no customers here. So they're riding around in a different vehicle. They come around the corner back over here, and as soon as he turned the corner facing the graveyard, the lights on his Yamaha ATV started doing the same thing. On and off, on and off, on and off. And he already knew what had happened to the other guy a few weeks prior, so they decided, let's just go back to camp. Let's not push fate. So off they go back to camp. I get here the following weekend. They tell me this whole story. I'm like, that's crazy, guys. I don't know what to think.